How about 4 negative die cut techniques that turned into 2 positively amazing cards? Hi, I'm Ardith, and today we're talking about using negative space in card making. And there's a built-in bonus, so stick around for that. To start, I grabbed a couple of the essential rectangle dies from Hutson to create my card panels. These dies not only cut the solid rectangle, but they also cut a narrow frame that you can use on your card. Or not. If your rectangle dies don't cut frames like this, stick around because I'll show you a way to get the same look with what you have. Next, I grabbed the essential rectangle for stitching die that fits in between these 2 framed rectangle dies. These 2 rectangle sets are designed to work together and one of my favorite new products recently. The stitching dies will work with any rectangle dies you may have. I flipped them over and I fit them back together so that I could add some post-it tape to hold them in place while I ran them through my die cutting machine with a panel of white cardstock. See? One pass through the die cutting machine and I've already got 2 negative die cut elements going. The stitching holes and the space between the focal panel and the frame that results when I take away that narrow frame. I think these not so basic dies are a great addition to my craft room, but before we move on, let me just show you how to get a similar look without these dies. This time I grabbed 3 plain rectangle dies. These ones are from Waffle flour, but whatever you have will work. I'm using the biggest one, then one that is 2 sizes smaller, and finally the very next size. Again, I use that post-it tape to hold them together and I run them through my die cutting machine, and I get the 3 same pieces, without the stitch dot since I didn't use that die. But let's get back to the focal panel. I'm going to use more negativity here and cut this daisy from a Jillian Vance design out from the focal panel. Let's take a second and talk about choosing dies that will work well for this. This daisy has a very distinct daisy shape, and when I use the negative space created by cutting it out of my panel, I'll still know it's a daisy. Now take this older rose die from Hutson. It's a gorgeous die, but the outside shape of it is not very distinctive, and when I cut it from a panel, I may not be able to tell that it's a rose without putting the positive die cut back into it. The leaf is a different story. If you use that, yes, you'll lose the pretty details on the positive die cut, but the shape will still look like a leaf. An easy way to check the suitability of the die is to flip it over. This shows you what the hole will look like when you cut it out. And if you can't immediately tell what that hole is, it may not be the look you're going for. Simple shapes such as hearts, word bubbles, anything like that will work well for this technique. And it doesn't always have to be standalone dies. The hole you would create with this flower die from Altenew Fuchsia Florals will still look like a flower, even though there won't be stamping. That little tulip would work well too. And it also works with word dies. The same principles apply. If you get stuck and you can't tell by looking at a die whether it will work, just take a scrap piece of paper and cut it out. If you can read it, it works. If not, look for something else. Now let's get back to the card. I taped the 2 dies onto my panel, I ran them through the die cut machine, and now you can see the 2-for-1 benefit of this method. I have a panel with a cutout daisy and happy, but I also have the positive die cuts as well, the daisy and the happy. So now we have the makings of 2 cards. Let's look at the differences between the negative and the positive. For what I'm calling the negative card, I glued my frame and focal panel onto a card base where I blended bright Catherine Pooler inks, Tiki Torch, Pucker Up, and Flirty Fuchsia, which are showing through all the gorgeous negative space. The dots around the outside frame, the narrow frame around the focal panel, and the daisy and the happy word. Now let's compare with the positive card, where I glued the narrow white frames, the word, and the flower onto another card base. This one has a lot more of those bright colors showing. The real beauty of this method is that it works both ways. Start with the negative die cut and end up with the positive, or just do a little pre-planning when you're cutting the positive die cuts to end up with the negative design. 2-for-1 card design is pretty impressive, but here's a video where I got 4 cards from one panel using those frame dies. I'll see you there. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.